In the 4th year of being tangled up with Joshua, my family went bankrupt. His first love seized the opportunity to say, "It's good for her to suffer a bit and toughen up." Joshua listened to her and left me stranded on foreign streets. 4 months later, I returned home, battered and bruised. Everyone thought I would still cling to Joshua. Instead, I avoided him, returned his gifts, and cut him off completely. Joshua and his friends laughed, saying, "Finally got rid of that clingy person." But the day I left, he showed up at the airport, desperate and pleading, "Vivian, stay. Can't we just go back to how things were?" I smiled softly and pointed to my slightly rounded belly. "Joshua, how can things be the same?" The day I came back injured, Joshua's assistant met me at the airport. The room I entered was buzzing with a lively atmosphere. As I walked closer, I heard Joshua saying, "Vivian seems to have grown up, she's much more behaved now. It's about time she toughened up." Laura wasn't wrong. With Vivian's family bankrupt, she isn't a princess anymore. If she keeps being spoiled, who will tolerate her? It's a pity for Joshua, now she'll cling to you even more. Joshua sneered, "Don't I know it? She's just a leech." Just then, he spotted me walking through the door. The room went silent as everyone saw me. I could see the shock and disbelief in their eyes. Just 4 months ago, I was the radiant, spoiled rich girl. Now I looked like a refugee, withered and thin, as if I had barely escaped hell. Laura, usually so composed, seemed concerned. "Vivian, what happened? Come in." But I stood still. I didn't act like before when I'd let my displeasure show the minute I saw Laura next to Joshua. I used to get mad over a few words and end up crying, causing a scene with Joshua. My actions ruined gatherings, making a lot of people dislike me. Remembering all this, I found it amusing. Joshua frowned and asked impatiently, "What are you standing there for? Get in." His familiar look of disdain and impatience washed over his face. I lowered my gaze and smiled faintly. "Joshua, thank you for sending Michael to pick me up from the airport." "Vivian? I came today to return this to you." I took a small box from my coat pocket and handed it over to him. It was a simple luxury brand necklace, the only birthday gift Joshua ever gave me. I loved it and only wore it on my birthday. But now, I didn't want it anymore. Joshua didn't take it. He sat there with a stony expression, his lips tightly pursed. I hesitated for a moment but placed the box on the table. "Vivian, your hand," someone near me gasped. Joshua's eyes shot to my hands. My hands were covered in cracked wounds, my once delicate fingertips were blistered and scabbed, twisted and ugly. I pulled my hands back into my sleeves and looked at Joshua again. "Joshua, there's one last thing I came to say." "What is it?" His voice was chillingly cold. "These past years of clinging to you must have been frustrating." I gave him an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry for being so naive and spoiled. I won't bother you anymore." With that, I turned and walked out. But as I was leaving, Joshua called after me. "Vivian. You better follow through, don't make empty promises and end up embarrassing yourself." I paused but didn't look back. Got it. The night my family fell apart, I was still abroad. My dear father couldn't be saved. Soon after, my mom sold everything and moved to America to live with my uncle, leaving me with just a small apartment. I didn't blame her for leaving me behind. Instead, I was grateful she didn't let me end up homeless. This bed was small, but much better than cramming into a room with 7 or 8 people overseas. It was the best sleep I'd had in 4 months until the doorbell woke me up. Seeing Joshua through the peephole surprised me. But then I remembered he had a place here, too. I opened the door and beat him to speaking. "Sorry, I'll be out soon. I'm putting this apartment on the market." "Vivian, what do you mean?" Maybe it was my imagination, but Joshua seemed upset by what I said. "I'll move today, and you won't see me again, I promise," I said as I picked up my phone to call the agent, but Joshua snatched it out of my hand and smashed it on the ground. Playing hard to get? You've been at this for 4 years. Aren't you tired of it? Sell the apartment, move out, then end up wandering the streets at night, crying to me for help? Finally, moving into my place, right? Vivian, can you grow up a bit and stop with these tricks? I looked at the shattered phone on the floor, my heart aching. Those months, just filling my stomach was a struggle. The phone was a second-hand one the shopkeeper pitted me with when I returned. I bent down to pick up the pieces. Joshua threw his wallet at me. Go buy a new one, I'll repay you. So you won't have any excuse to stick to me. He stormed out after saying that. Staring at the wallet on the ground, tears mixed with laughter rolled down my cheeks. In the end, I bought the cheapest phone. He was right, keeping things separate was best. I called Michael to pick up Joshua's wallet. Vivian, I'm really stuck at the moment. Could you please drop it off at the office? After a moment, I agreed. All right, I'll bring it over in a bit. After hanging up, Michael looked toward Joshua, who stood by the window. I don't quite get why Joshua signaled him to say that, but he could vaguely sense it. Joshua didn't seem to hate Vivian as much as he thought. Did you get the medicine? Yeah, I got it all right here, Michael quickly handed over the paper bag. It was full of ointments for wounds and scar removal, clearly meant for Vivian. Joshua nodded, all right, you can go now. About 40 minutes later, the phone at the front desk rang into the secretary's office. Michael knocked, came in, and cautiously said, Joshua, Vivian sent a local express delivery. He barely finished speaking when the jade paperweight on the desk was suddenly smashed to the floor. Michael kept his head down, too scared to even breathe loudly. After a moment, Joshua chuckled, well, haven't seen her in months, looks like she's grown some guts. After I put the house up with the agency, I found a cheap hotel to stay in temporarily. Joshua hadn't contacted me. On the contrary, he was unusually flashy, publicly hanging out with Laura. I kept getting calls, Vivian, are you and Joshua having a fight? Is Laura going to marry Joshua? I heard they were looking at rings yesterday. I didn't respond. I just glanced at myself in the mirror, noticing my slightly rounded belly. I called the agent again to lower the house price by 50 grand. I wanted to leave here as soon as possible and never come back. The baby inside me was a surprise within a surprise. By the time I realized it, I was already 3 months along. The doctor said the fetus was well formed, developing really well, with tiny hands and feet. As I lay there, tears suddenly welled up. But after thinking for a long time, I decided to not keep it. Fate had other plans, as when I was preparing for the procedure, chaos broke out somewhere, distant explosions echoed, and the hospital lost power. This child stayed because of that. I comforted myself by thinking at least his father was a handsome Eastern man. Joshua had left me in that chaotic foreign land. We all know the potential dangers awaiting a young, pretty, single woman there. Better to stick with a man. When I loudly asked him for help in Mandarin, I was already accepting my fate. But when he offered his hand, fate took a different path. The biological father of my baby is that genuinely decent, outrageously handsome, and rich Eastern man. Better than Joshua, at least. Maybe this was fate's odd way of giving me a little comfort. The day the house was sold, I got a call from Laura, Vivian, I decided to accept Joshua's proposal. Wish you two the best. Can you come to our engagement party? Sorry. Are you still not over it, Vivian? Laura seemed to pity me with her gentle tone, some things you just can't force. But you're smarter now, playing the retreat game. It's useless, though. Joshua listens to me and has always only cared for me. See? One word from me, and he ditched you. Laura, what are you really saying? There was a brief silence on the other end. Vivian, I've reconsidered, so I want to clearly tell you, stop entangling with Joshua. Am I entangling? Don't act like I don't know what you're planning. You love him too much to let go, especially with your family out of money. Well, if he only cares for you and listens to you, what are you afraid of then? Laura was silent for a long time, so I hung up. Seconds later, I got a voice message. Joshua's tone was lazy and dismissive. Finally got rid of that pestering situation. Never felt this free in my life. Congrats to Joshua, you've been liberated, ha. I chuckled at that and turned off my phone. The day I left, the sky was gloomy with heavy smog. I got off the cab with my suitcase and walked into the airport terminal. I heard a loud engine roar in the distance. Instinctively, I turned back and saw that all too familiar car racing towards me. Clutching the suitcase handle, I quickly turned and walked away. Vivian. Joshua got out and quickly caught up to me. He grabbed my arm, his voice trembling a little. Where are you going? I looked at him calmly. Joshua, let go. His eyes were red, and he seemed pretty lost. Vivian, stay, let's go back to how things were, okay? I let go of my suitcase handle and took a step back, slowly undoing my coat. The winter wind here was biting cold, chilling me to the bone. My waist was still slim, but my belly had a slight swell. Joshua's gaze drifted downward, finally freezing on it. I smiled at him. Joshua, look, how can we even go back? The howling wind seemed to pause as if someone hit a switch. Joshua just stood there, unmoving for what felt like forever. Eventually, he lifted his teary eyes, looking at me. Vivian, why did it end up like this? I buttoned up my coat, fixing the hair the wind had tousled. You're asking me? Doesn't this align with what you wanted? No, Vivian, I might have left you, but Laura said she had family there, she'd have them pick you up. She said you were too spoiled and unaware of real hardships, that you'd never marry with that attitude. I was so annoyed by you then that I agreed without thinking. I never meant to hurt you, just wanted you to struggle a bit, so you'd stop after returning. Vivian, didn't Laura's family pick you up? The smile on my face gradually faded in the cold wind. He was gone. Joshua sighed suddenly. I knew it. Laura has always been generous and thorough. But do you know what her relatives do? Joshua paused. Vivian? They're involved in crime, smuggling, all sorts of bad stuff. I looked at Joshua blankly. His shocked and ridiculous expression was reflected in my hollow eyes. I almost died trying to escape from him. Lost my ID, phone, wallet, everything. I was so hungry I had to fight with beggars for food and slept under bridges at night, almost assaulted multiple times. Eventually, I was targeted to be sold into the red light district. Over those 4 months, I ran out of tears. But maybe the current wind is too strong, too cold, making my eyes painfully sting. At the time, the only person who offered me a hand was him, the biological father of the child inside me. Don't say any more. Vivian, don't say any more. Joshua's face was filled with pain. He stepped forward, grabbed my wrist. I'll take you to the hospital. Vivian, this child with unknown origins can't stay. Why? He couldn't look at me, his voice was low and hoarse. You get rid of the child, let's just pretend nothing in the past happened. Vivian, I'll treat you well. Your mom went to America, you have no other family here. Stay with me and I'll take care of you. Joshua. I shook off his hand forcefully. Vivian, don't be silly, no one else knows you're pregnant. I'll arrange a private hospital for you to terminate the pregnancy, and I'll keep it a secret for you. Your reputation won't be affected. And then? I deliberately asked him, will you marry me? Joshua was clearly stunned. He lowered his eyes, his lips tense, seemingly struggling for a long time before making a decision. Vivian, given your family's current situation, the elders won't agree. But don't worry, I won't abandon you, I'll take care of you forever. Joshua. I softly called his name. And even smiled lightly at him the moment he looked up at me. Do you know what I'm most grateful for now? What is it? I'm glad I never had anything with you. I'm glad the child inside me isn't yours. Vivian. In Joshua's eyes was a panic he couldn't hide. I stepped back a couple of steps. Don't come looking for me again. Don't make me regret ever liking someone like you. I grabbed my suitcase and turned to leave. But Joshua chased after me again. Vivian, where can you go in this situation? You've never had to work a day in your life. How will you survive away from here and away from me? I suddenly turned around, released my suitcase, and showed Joshua my scarred hands. With these hands, I won't starve. Joshua's eyes were vacant, his whole body shaking fiercely. I'd never seen him like this. In our circle, he was the most reckless, the most arrogant rich kid. No matter where he went, he was the proudest, most rebellious gentleman's son. When I was young and naive, I prayed more than once. Prayed that Joshua would like me, treat me a little better. Prayed that Laura would stay away from him and stop disrupting our relationship. Prayed that I could marry Joshua. If he smiled at me or treated me a little better, I'd forget all the grievances and tears, and continue to revolve around him endlessly, tirelessly. Now, he's the one who can't let go of me. He's begging me not to leave. In his eyes, there's finally space for me. But I only find it laughable, feel a sense of indescribable disgust, repulsion. Vivian. Joshua tried to hold my hand. But just before touching me, he stopped. His hands were those of a pampered rich kid. Mine used to be like that too. But now, with twisted joints, scars, blisters turned into ugly calluses. They're not pretty anymore, but they're stronger. Flowers once grown in a greenhouse, even out of the greenhouse, won't necessarily wither. Dragging the suitcase into the airport hall, I suddenly felt a slight discomfort in my lower abdomen. Maybe it was the emotional turmoil from the earlier argument. Or maybe my body's been under too much strain, it can't handle it anymore. As a warm flow spread, my vision started to spin. In that final moment of consciousness, many voices were calling my name. All jumbled together. But quickly, all the voices disappeared, turning into dead silence. When I opened my eyes again, all I saw was blinding white. The smell of disinfectant filled my nose. Machines beside me beeped rhythmically. I instinctively wanted to touch my abdomen. But a gentle hand stopped me. Vivian, don't worry, the baby is fine. Who are you? I stared blankly at the middle-aged woman before me. She looked plain, but her eyes were kind. Her clothing style was a bit odd, and her Mandarin was clumsy. I vaguely felt like I'd seen her somewhere, but couldn't remember. Felix already knows, he's on a plane to the mainland now. The woman tucked in my blanket and gently asked, would you like some water? I nodded, my muddled brain slowly coming to. Felix. Could it be him? But back then, we agreed never to meet again, no strings attached. Right, because I'm pregnant, I've inadvertently broken the rules. I don't know the background of this Felix. But from his attire and daily expenses, I can guess his background and origin are significant. That morning, as he dressed to leave, he casually asked if I wanted to follow him in the future. At the time, that was the best option for me. But I refused. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone again. He didn't force me when I declined. Even gave me some money. But I refused that too. He saved my life. I spent a night with him, which barely made us even. In the 3 months after that, I never saw him again. But I did experience hardship during my wandering around. Little by little, I learned how to support myself and budget wisely. I also learned to read the room and stopped being cluelessly arrogant. During the toughest times, I cried and regretted my decisions. When I was too exhausted to even get up, I thought about going back to Felix. But in the end, I gritted my teeth and pushed through. Depending on a man for a moment means you'll live beneath him your whole life. My family went bankrupt, and I was no longer some rich girl. If I went back with that spoiled princess attitude, I'd probably have to rely on others for the rest of my life. But I don't want to live like that anymore. After the aunt helped me drink some water and eat, I fell asleep again, hazily. It wasn't restful sleep, I even dreamed of Felix at the end. He sat there so leisurely on the sofa in the living room, lighting a cigar with a blowtorch. I was brought in by a servant, standing there for a good while. Only then did he look up at me. Vivian. Felix. He had those indifferent, emotionless eyes. When he looked at people, it was like there was always an unbreakable fog between us. He was so near yet seemed worlds away. In the dream, after he called my name, he said nothing more until that cigar was finished. My back was drenched with sweat. In the dream, my belly was a bit bigger. But my body was still weak, and I couldn't stand for long. As I was about to collapse, he finally spoke slowly. Who gave you the guts to secretly carry my Felix's child? Felix, I didn't. I took all the pills you left. You can check the cameras if you don't believe me. I tried to defend myself urgently, but he didn't seem convinced at all. He lazily waved his hand, signaling the bodyguard to drag me out. Felix, Felix, please don't. I cried out, waking up from the dream in tears. As I opened my eyes in a daze, I kept murmuring Felix's name. Did you have a nightmare? Crying like a child. In my blurred vision, I saw a handsome man's face. He had a completely Eastern face, but his eyes were amber-colored. His Mandarin wasn't perfect, but his deep voice was soothing. He wore a black custom-made suit with peak lapels, sitting by my bed. He was dabbing away my tears from the dream with a handkerchief. The scene was bizarre yet strangely harmonious. I stared at him blankly, forgetting my tears. Felix? It's me. He placed the soaked handkerchief aside and replied softly. I snapped back to reality, trying to sit up in a hurry. Felix raised his hand to stop me. Lie down. I ignored everything else, hurrying to explain. Felix. I took all the pills you left that day. You can ask the servants in the house or check the cameras. I don't know why I ended up pregnant. As soon as I found out, I rushed to the hospital. But there was an explosion, and the power went out, so the procedure didn't happen. I know for someone like Felix, you don't even tell a single lie. Now you can have the hospital arrange the surgery immediately. If you're worried, you can wait until it's over yourself. Vivian. He suddenly spoke up. Just like in the dream, his voice was calm yet deep as he called my name. But unlike the dream where his tone was impatient, it was gentle now. I don't kill. Felix said, and his gaze fell on my face again. Those indifferent eyes, with his gentle voice, also showed a hint of softness. Besides, it's my child, too. He leaned forward slightly, his long fingers brushing away the damp strands of hair from my forehead. Take care, don't overthink. Felix. He moved his fingers away, standing straight as he looked at me. His eyes seemed forever devoid of emotion, unless you truly don't want him. On the day I was discharged, Felix asked me the same question for the second time. Vivian, are you coming with me? But this time, I hesitated to give him the easy answer I had before. He wore a simple black coat, with bodyguards and assistants following behind him. He seemed like a calm and gentle person. Even when he spoke, it was always unhurried, never flustered. But he had a presence that invoked fear in others. I was no longer the naive Vivian from before. Going with him meant a life of luxury and ease. But it also meant a life like a caged bird or a puppet. Yet when he looked at me like that, there was a glimpse of sincerity in his gentle eyes. It took me a while to say no. Felix, I'm grateful to you. But I'm really sorry, I can't go with you. The moment the words left my mouth, it felt like everything fell silent. The people behind him stood still, heads bowed, barely audible. I couldn't help feeling nervous, palms growing clammy. All right. Felix's voice broke the unbearable silence. His expression unchanged, as calm as ever. Just, thank you. I quickly shook my head. No, you don't have to worry about me. Felix nodded slightly. Is the money enough? Yes. If you have any trouble, reach out to me. Okay. Vivian, this isn't just talk. I quickly said, Felix, I won't do anything foolish. Good. Felix gave me one last look. Turned and got into the car. I watched it drive away until it disappeared from sight. Then I gently touched my belly, letting out a long sigh. After the car had left the hospital for quite some time, Felix, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. Ken, do I look intimidating? Felix, there isn't a more gentle person than you, why would you ask that? She seemed really scared of me. Ken paused for a moment and tried to explain. Vivian just doesn't know you well yet. After all, you guys haven't spent much time together. But it seemed like Felix didn't even hear Ken's reply. He looked out the car window, his long fingers fiddling with the wooden beads on his wrist. Almost as if talking to himself, he muttered, even with a kid, she still won't be with me. Ken went silent, unsure of what to say next. When Vivian shouted for help that day, he thought Felix was just being kind for a moment by saving her. Even after bringing her home, Ken didn't think much of it. Felix had been living alone for so many years. Not only were the elderly family members getting anxious about it, but even the people around him felt for him. But who would have thought the girl preferred to leave and face hardships rather than stay? Ken, who had a rough childhood himself, couldn't help but feel something. Watching Vivian struggle in the slums, working her hands to blisters for just a meal, Ken was moved. Vivian had been born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Probably never even washed a dish before. But to endure such hardship and suffering, how could one not admire her? Perhaps it was this persistence and grit of Vivian's that made Mr. Felix even more interested. That's why he had someone secretly watching over her, and chose the most trustworthy person to follow her back to the country. Later, when news came that Vivian nearly had a miscarriage, Mr. Felix left the negotiation table immediately. Everyone saw the hustle and bustle he went through. Even Ken thought they'd be getting a new woman in the house. But, it turned out Vivian still refused. Ken wanted to comfort him with a few words, but didn't know what to say. Looking at Mr. Felix sitting there in silence, Ken felt bad, too. Sir, if nothing else works, should I go get Vivian and bring her back? Felix glanced up at Ken. Ken, no one can touch her. But sir. Ken's urgency almost made him forget his manners. If she wants it this way, let her be. Sir. That's enough. Felix closed his eyes and Ken had no choice but to keep quiet. Leaving the hospital, I suddenly got a call from Jason. Lots of folks in the circle didn't like me. But Jason was kind of alright with me. He's a few years older and often looked out for me. Even though Joshua and I had parted ways, I still addressed Jason the same way. Jason, you need something from me? Vivian, are you free to come over right now? I was silent for a moment. Jason, if it's urgent, just say it over the phone. Joshua and Laura got into a fight. He hit her. I was a bit surprised. After all, Laura had always been like a goddess to Joshua all these years. Now, Joshua was set to marry her, so why lay a hand on her suddenly? Laura's threatening to jump, and even Joshua can't stop her. Jason, what could I even do if I went there? Joshua's forcing Laura to apologize to you. I couldn't help but laugh. That's really not necessary. Laura was wrong to stir things up, but who's the real culprit here? Besides, if not for my persistent entanglement over the years, annoying everyone, how would this whole mess have even started? Vivian, Joshua still cares about you. Jason, stop it. Hearing that now just felt ridiculously sickening. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up. Vivian. I hung up the phone, feeling completely drained. I wanted to leave overnight but was too exhausted. Plus, the doctor said I needed weekly checkups to protect my pregnancy. So I booked a cheap hotel near the hospital. Just after booking, Jason texted me. Vivian, Joshua's hurt, pretty bad. In the photo, Joshua was sitting on the couch, looking defeated, covering his forehead. Blood was streaming through his fingers, half his face was drenched in it. If it were before, I'd be crying, rushing to his side without a second thought. But now, I calmly replied. Take him to the hospital. It does look serious. Vivian, Joshua refuses to go. I didn't reply. A moment later, I got a call from an unknown number. I had a feeling who it might be, so I didn't pick up. After that, my phone stayed quiet. Upon arriving at the hotel, I freshened up quickly and went to bed. I didn't wake up until 9 the next morning. There were a few messages on my phone. They were from Laura, sent at 2 in the morning. Vivian, are you happy now? Joshua won't marry me anymore, all because of you. I swear I'll repay this slap one day. I just felt this person was really out there. If blame is to be assigned, how many slaps should Laura receive herself? So, I decided to block all these numbers. Even Jason's wasn't an exception. Later at the hospital for a checkup, I ran into Joshua again. He must have come here just to wait for me. When we crossed paths, I didn't avoid him. Gave him a nod, and headed to the elevator. Joshua had bandages on his head, looking pretty disheveled. Didn't say anything, just silently followed behind me. Registration, checkup, and picking up medicine. I got tired, so I sat down on a bench to rest. Joshua looked at me several times, about to speak but then stopped. Finally, after a bit, he called out to me. Vivian, that guy doesn't want you and the kid, right? That's between him and me. Joshua looked at me, like he'd made a great decision. Vivian, be with me. I'll help raise the baby. I didn't plan on wasting a word on him. But hearing that just made me laugh in anger. I looked up at him. Joshua, what do you mean by that? I saw everything that day, Vivian. You were taken by those people and sent to the hospital. I couldn't even get close. Jason told me that guy is not someone to mess with, he's got a mysterious background and is bad news. And now, it all lines up. He doesn't want you or the baby. But Vivian, we've known each other since we were kids. I can't stand seeing you like this. I'm giving you a house, it's yours now, and I'll cover all the expenses for you and the kid. Joshua, I know you won't just be generous for no reason. What's your real motive? Vivian, I want you to stay by my side. He came up to me, crouched down to look me in the eyes. I want you to look at me the way you used to, love me like before, be with me forever. I don't mind if you want to keep the child, as long as you stay with me. I looked at Joshua in front of me. Gone was his arrogance and pride, he seemed like a little kid asking for candy. But my heart didn't stir at all. Joshua. I looked down at him and said, the Vivian who loved you and wanted to be with you died in a foreign land 4 months ago. We can start over, Vivian, I promise I'll be good to you. But I don't like you anymore. Joshua, there's not a bit of joy in my heart for you now. You know me best, I don't like to look at someone I don't like, not even for a second. The color drained from his face, but he still wouldn't give up. If you don't like me, who could you like? That guy who abandoned you and the kid? Vivian, do you know how hard it's gonna be for a single mom with a kid whose dad is unknown? Hard? I'm not even afraid of death, why would I fear hardship? So, you still hate me for leaving you behind, right? What will it take for you to forgive me? He wouldn't let go of my hand, his emotions getting more intense. I didn't want to argue in a hospital. So, I just casually replied, have Laura go through what I did, then. If I can make that happen, would you come back to me? I pushed him away, stood up, tightened my coat, and walked out, we'll see. But Joshua could never let Laura go through hell. So, I didn't think much of what I said. After knowing him for years, every time I went against Laura, I never won. Joshua always favored her. This time, it'll be the same, I guess. But I'm not upset or sad about things like that anymore. I got Felix's call a week later in the evening. I was walking around outside the community square. There was a little fountain, and a flock of pigeons showed up from who knows where. Felix's deep voice came through just as the pigeons took off. Their cooing blended with the colorful dusk clouds touched by sunlight. I sat on a bench and felt oddly peaceful inside. Vivian, I've got something that might be a hassle for you. Felix, go ahead. Next month, I have to go out of town to handle something personally. Felix spoke in his usual unhurried tone. If I come back safely, I'll keep my promise not to interfere with you and the kid. But if I don't, the baby in you is my only blood left in this world. So, Vivian, would you stay at my place with the kid? It felt like someone gripped my heart tightly. In that moment when I could barely breathe, I asked, Felix, is something dangerous happening? Don't worry, it's just some private grievances. It won't involve you or the kid. And this is just me asking your thoughts. If you're unwilling, Vivian, I won't force you. Felix, I have to go for a hospital checkup tomorrow. There was a short 2-second silence on the other end. All right. Sorry for bothering you. So, Felix, I might not be able to leave until the day after tomorrow. Could you send someone then to pick me up? There was a faint crackling in the signal at my ear. In that sound, Felix's breathing didn't seem as steady as before. I touched my slightly rounded belly and found myself lightly smiling for some reason. Will 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow work? Yes, it will. All right then, it's settled, Vivian. Okay, Felix, it's settled then. When the call ended, it was 2 a.m. his time. The sharp wind carried the scent of blood heavily. It pulled him back from that rare tender moment to reality. Felix put away the phone. The gentle look from the call gone from his face. Unhurried, he slowly descended the steps. He stopped in front of a man kneeling, shaking like a leaf. In his line of sight was first a pair of shiny leather shoes. But those expensive shoes were splattered with blood. The man was trembling with fear, prostrating himself lower and begged non-stop. Felix, please, forgive me this once. I won't dare again. His chin was sharply lifted by the shoe. The man, face pale, slowly raised his eyes. Under the cold moonlight, Felix's eyes were even chillier than the moon itself. I've said, with anyone following me, if it's off limits, no one touches it. Felix. Leo, not only did you mess with it, but your guys injured 3 cops. Felix, I beg you. I'll never do it again, I swear, I'll vow with my own arm. Too late. Ken, take him to the police. Felix. The man was stunned. His crime meant death with the cops. Think about your wife and kids. The man fell silent immediately. Felix left the courtyard, and someone handed him a warm towel. He carefully wiped his hands, and as he bent to get in the car, his tone remained calm. Make sure everything is clean here, she's coming the day after tomorrow. Don't scare her. Felix's estate is huge. Its gardens are all filled with different sceneries, changing with every season. Now it's winter, but the flowers are still in full bloom. The white buildings were beautifully arranged. He took me to the main house, still in building number 1. The master bedroom suite on the 2nd floor looked just like it did that night. Walking in, I felt my face getting a little red. Felix grabbed my suitcase and sent the servants out. You take a break, then freshen up. I'll unpack. Felix, I can do it myself. You're pregnant, and it's been hard on you. He held my hand and pulled me to sit on the sofa. I watched him open the suitcase and start organizing my things. Clothes and everyday items were easy enough. But when he touched my personal garments, I had to get up. Felix. I got up, unusually agile for a pregnant woman, and snatched my lingerie from his big hands. Maybe it was the redness of my face, but Felix didn't insist. I quickly sorted my underwear, not even noticing that Felix's own intimate clothes were in the same drawer. I headed to the bathroom unaware. Felix stood in the huge walk-in closet for a long time, looking at the colorful clothes mixed with his usual black, white, and gray. Slowly, a smile filled his eyes. I don't know much about Felix. From what I could tell, he seemed like someone with a great background and a legit businessman. So initially, I didn't take what he said on the phone too seriously. Not until I overheard Ken mentioning that Felix was heading to Mexico to deal with some really dangerous folks. These people had done something they shouldn't have behind his back. Now Mr. Felix had to fix everything, cleanly back out of the mess, no matter how tricky and dangerous it was. But Vivian, you're a blessing for him, with his kid in your belly, it's the best thing ever. If anything were to happen, at least there'd be a piece of him still in the world. Ken started crying as he spoke, and seeing him, I couldn't help but tear up too. When Felix came back and saw Ken had made me cry, he got mad, something quite rare for him. Don't be mad at him, I said, tugging on Felix's sleeve, eyes red. Felix, spend tonight with me and the baby. In the first few days here, I slept alone in the master bedroom on the second floor, while Felix stayed in the guest room. We'd only seen each other a few times, sure, we'd had a night together and now I was pregnant. But in truth, we barely knew each other. So when Felix came in wearing a robe and held me close, I was a little tense. But he only brushed my hair aside, kissed my forehead, and made no other moves. In the dark, I took his hand and placed it on my small belly. Felix, feel the baby. His breath slowed at that moment, taking a while to return to normal. His warm, dry hand softly caressed my belly, and slowly, I began to feel sleepy. Vivian. Just before falling asleep, Felix kissed the corner of my lips. I'm sorry, Vivian. I was too tired to ask why he said that. And later, until he left, I forgot to ask the reason. It wasn't until much, much later, when our child was almost off to elementary school, that he confessed during a drunken night. In this world, there aren't so many coincidences or accidents. It's just when someone plans an entire path for the one they love. Felix stayed in the master bedroom the night before leaving for Mexico. I was almost 5 months pregnant by then. Maybe it was because I was relaxed and carefully looked after that the health I'd lost was slowly coming back. I even looked a bit like a pregnant woman now. These days, I could sense Felix's struggle. He was in his prime, strong and healthy. And me, even while pregnant, I hadn't lost my figure. Instead, my skin is glowing from the care I took. I had an inclination to sleep during pregnancy but occasionally heard Felix get up at night and go to the bathroom to cool off. That night, after he kissed me and wished me good night, I responded and held him. No one knows I kept having this one dream. Not about the hardship I faced those months, but a moment of our first meeting. I was desperately crying out for help to him in Chinese. The only Asian face in a sea of people, his presence was a beacon. Though I had little hope, like a lifeline that probably couldn't save me. But he had stopped, turned, and looked at my miserable state. Then said something to the guys next to him. Just like that, the ones grabbing me let go in fear. Clinging to myself, trying to cover my torn clothes, a heavy coat was dropped on my shoulders. Then he offered me his hand, long, powerful, with a string of sandalwood beads around his wrist. At that moment, I thought I'd met the soft-hearted angel. Vivian, don't tease me. Felix caught my hand. Why not? With a helpless chuckle, he kissed my fingertips. You know that's a loaded question. Almost 5 months now. The doctor said it's okay. I swallowed my embarrassment, daring to meet his eyes. Or is it that you don't want to? I'm afraid of hurting you and the baby. His hand landed on my belly with a sigh. Sleep, okay? I finally looked away, resting my hot face against his chest. Felix, the doctor says as long as we're not too rough, it's fine. After I spoke, he stayed silent, but his grip grew steadily tenser. I bit my lip and turned around in his arms. I've read online, this way, we won't press on my belly. Vivian. His heated kisses fell densely on my nape and shoulders, his voice hoarse. Who taught you to seduce like this? There are places online. He lowered his head and whispered by my ear, tell me if there's any discomfort. Would you stop if I told you to? I don't even know where I got the courage from. Didn't realize I had this rebellious side. But right after saying it, I curled up like a scared little quail, full of regret. Felix hugged me tight afterwards. In a rough whisper by my ear, he said, I won't. But Vivian, I'll be a bit gentler. Man, he's killing me. He probably doesn't know. A long, long time ago, I unknowingly got lost in his gentleness. 2 weeks after Felix left, I went out to clear my head. Unexpectedly ran into Laura. When she saw me, gone was her usual haughty attitude. She grabbed my hand, desperately asking me to help her get back home. That's when I realized, what Joshua promised at the hospital wasn't just talk. But Laura's relative had some influence here. Didn't they protect her? Later, Ken told me Laura's cousin Leo got the death sentence. Vivian, I'm begging you. Laura knelt, clinging to my legs, pleading desperately. I looked down at her. Leo's gone to jail, how can Laura have a good life? She was abandoned here by Joshua, just like me once. But unlike me, she didn't have the luck to meet someone like Felix. Ken wanted to throw her out, but I touched my swollen belly. Thinking to myself, Laura's bad, but not evil enough to deserve the worst. When I asked Joshua for that kind of favor, there was an element of stirring the pot. But honestly, the one truly deserving resentment is Joshua. Let's just say it's for the baby and his father, gaining some good karma. Even if Felix lied to me about some things, I just want him to come back safely. Also, I really don't want to be a young widow with money. Ken, call her family. I glanced at Laura, she'd clearly been badly shaken. Seemed mentally unstable. She lucked out. I chuckled, no, it's not luck. I waved Ken over and whispered a few things to him. Days later, Laura's family back home got the news. $1 million, and their daughter could safely return home. At the same time, Laura's parents found out Joshua abandoned her abroad. They raised a big fuss, leaving Joshua unable to cope. When Laura went back, her folks forced Joshua to marry her, claiming her reputation was damaged. Word is, they were at each other's throats at the wedding, and Joshua even hit her. Laura's parents didn't let it go, both sides were strife-ridden. Their married life was like living in hell. The once unattainable, first love goddess became his most hated enemy. Joshua drank daily, and coming home drunk led to constant brawls with Laura. Hitting her became routine. But that's a story for another day. Has nothing to do with me. Oh, and that $1 million? I donated it all to children's charities and welfare homes. Felix promised to be back before I gave birth. But up until a week before, there was no sign of him. The last message I got from him was 7 days ago. The household was getting uneasy. Even I caught wind of the negative gossip. I thought about it and called Ken over. We thoroughly checked every servant in the house. Anyone acting shady or disloyal got sent far away. Then we locked everything down, no one in or out. 3 days before due, still no word from Felix. Ken couldn't sit still, insisting on going to Mexico. I was on the verge of a breakdown, near delivery yet growing thinner by the day. Ken, go. Whatever the case, dead or alive, I need an answer. But Ken, however concerned, was ordered by Felix to stay. He was eager to help, but more anxious about me. He left his most trusted subordinate at home instead. But Vivian, it's getting unsafe here. Let me take you back to our country. His heart was for Felix. But I was carrying Felix's child. Plus, with no word from Felix for so long, his enemies were on the prowl. The other day, Ken caught a few armed strangers outside the mansion. Ken, I'm not going back. The baby and I will wait here for him. Vivian. Go on, I'll be fine. I smiled at him like I did facing Joshua before. And extended my hand to Ken. See? Vivian's unbreakable. She can take any pain without fear. Ken saw my hand that hasn't fully healed. Tears pooled in his eyes. I'm not leaving. I'll listen to him. I need to protect you and his child. I wanted to urge him to find Felix. Maybe his presence could turn things around for Felix. But before I could speak, my belly twisted in sharp pain. The intense contractions silenced me. Just as I was about to pass out, one last thought crossed my mind. I wouldn't make it to Felix's return, wouldn't have him by my side during childbirth. Before he left, he asked if I was scared. I said I wasn't scared of anything. But in truth, I was terrified, of pain, hardship, being beaten, scolded, cold and hungry. And terrified of the surgical cut when giving birth. So, Felix, if only you were here. If only you were here, it'd make all the difference. Ken and the servants rushed me to the hospital. Just as I was wheeled into the delivery room, before the nurse could shut the door, a strong hand suddenly pushed the door wide open. Vivian. Even lying on the operating table, slipping into unconsciousness. I faintly heard Felix's voice. With all my might, I tried to open my eyes, to confirm it was him. But I was too weak. Yet my hand was tightly grasped by a warm, firm hand. Its temperature and grip, indescribably familiar. And just like that, I felt at ease. Vivian. Felix leaned down and kissed me gently. I'm back, Vivian. The whole delivery process went pretty smoothly. The doctors said I was in good shape and completely fit for a natural birth. Plus, with natural birth, you recover faster and avoid the post-C-section pain. But Felix seemed pretty scared. He got so nervous that he ended up disrupting the doctors and was asked to leave the room. And when I was crying in the delivery room, Felix was crying right outside too. Ken was really startled when he saw that. Although Felix made Ken swear not to spread the news, Ken whispered it to me as soon as I was out of the delivery room. That image makes me chuckle, but then it hits me, and I start crying too. No matter how tough you are, who doesn't want some love and care? Shortly after I gave birth, Felix scheduled the surgery. Some of the older folks at home weren't too thrilled. But those old-fashioned ways fade when they see their great-grandchild, and they didn't push back anymore. Felix came back with injuries this time. The reason he went MIA for a while was because he was so badly hurt. I didn't say much. When our baby was 3 months old and I felt fully recovered, I took Felix to visit a temple. I prayed to Buddha, hoping my sincerity might bring some blessings his way too. When we knelt with incense in front of Buddha, Felix suddenly said to me, Vivian, you don't know how much guilt I carry. He confessed he switched the medication and caused the explosion that led to the hospital power outage. Later, he tricked her to leave China and come to him. He doesn't believe in Buddha. He's not afraid of Buddha's judgment, he fears she'll fear him and pull away. He's scared that his longing for her won't be forgiven. I glanced at him and offered him the incense. Then you don't know how merciful and kind the Buddha here is. Felix held the incense and watched as I knelt sincerely. Eventually, he copied my gesture and knelt beside me. I looked up, devoutly, at Buddha. Felix, on the other hand, kept glancing sideways at me. Long ago, we didn't know. But that one glance back then sealed our fate for this lifetime.